Welcome to Lecture 4 on Master Detail Forms. So let's think about where we've come from right now, what we learned in the first 3 lectures. We covered the basic concepts and objects that were in a form. In the second lecture, we went through the wizard, how to create a very simple form based on a single database table, and we covered the different file types. And then in lecture 3, we went through the development environment, and we covered some of the different windows and the different things that you look at when you're there. So now we're going to start to go into a more complex form. And it's more likely that you'll be doing master detail forms in most of your forms. And what a master detail form is, you're coming from 2 different tables, and one is the master and one is the detail. Say, instructors and the courses that they're teaching. So the instructor is the master information, and then the detail information is the information that repeats for each detail, for each master, sorry. So each master, there's one master, and the master has numerous details. So the main concepts we have here is, by the end of this chapter, we want to know how to create a master detail form, and we also want to work with the different relationships in a master detail form. Now, a lot of this comes through stepping through the wizard and choosing the options. So an important part of this chapter will be the demonstration which follows. And I'll walk through the wizards that you're familiar with from the previous chapter, and we'll show you that there are some new things that are going to come up because it's a master detail form and how to work with that. And so I'm just going to cover some of the basic principles now, and then you'll go on to the demonstration where you'll see how these are applied. So a master detail form is a form which is based on 2 database tables, and these should have a primary, they have a relationship which reflects a primary key to a foreign key relationship. A good example of this in the database which you're working with on this series is the student database, and a master detail relationship that we have is like students and enrollments. And you remember that we have a student table. Now this is got a record for every student. And then the enrollment table, now that's just an association table. Now that just takes a student ID and a section ID. So if you want to get the complete information, you go farther. From the enrollment, you have to go to the section, and then the section goes to the course table, and the course table gives you the actual name of the course. So you have to go that far to get that. But what's very important in a master detail form is the main blocks of information that you want to put in the form are the blocks which can be updated. So if we're creating a table, or rather a form where we can enter students' enrollments, then what we want to have is the ability to see the student information, and the main thing that you want to edit on that form is just a list of what courses they're enrolled in. You do not want to give the user the ability to change the name or the description that's associated with that particular course. So the main components that you want to have on the database block are going to be the ones that can be updated, which relate to the student and the enrollment. And what you'll see is when we go into the next chapters where we go through triggers, then we'll actually pull in the information for, say, the course description, or like on the student, we want to see the student information, we want to see his zip code, we want to see his city and state, but we don't want to give the user the ability to change the city and state which corresponds to the zip code. So the easiest way to handle that is not to have those items into the database blocks. Now, of course, there are so many different ways of setting up your form and a lot of different options. So that's just one way that I'm recommending to you. You'll see that with different triggers and different properties, you can do almost anything. So another example of a master detail relationship would be an instructor section. So this would be like the instructor, information about a given instructor, and then information about the sections of of the courses that that instructor is teaching. So it's not necessary for you to be able to read all of this. I know some of this is like a little small print, but what I want to show here is on the far left side, I have those two little, what do you call it, spheres or whatever, and you can see how we have a branch from the instructor to section. It branches out its section. So what this is representing is on the database side, I have a table for the instructor, and for one instructor, I have many sections. Remember, you would have covered this in your SQL class. So that's why that branch comes down from instructor to section, and then we have 3 branches on the section side. So that means for each single instructor, they're going to be teaching a number of sections. Now remember, the section table is an associated table, so the only thing that we're going to see in the section table is the ID for the instructor and the ID for the section. If we want to go in and see some more details about the course, we're going to have to go into the course table where the description is. The section table in this database still has some other information like, you know, what room it's being taught in and some other things like that, location. So you can see that's on the database side. Now, when you go through the wizard, first you create the instructor and then you create the section. And when you're creating the section data block, it can see that there already is an existing data block, and it asks you if you want to create a relationship there. And then there is a feature where it automatically can figure out what that relationship is. So you're probably thinking, well, how can it do that? Well, what it's doing is basically it's going to the data dictionary, and the data dictionary has a lot of this information, and that's where it can see the correlation. So once you've created those two, then you'll have 2 different nodes under your data blocks in the object navigator of the form, and the form will have the instructor and the section. Now I advise you, a lot of times when you go through the wizards and you create new blocks, you'll find that the different blocks are not necessarily going to be in the order that you want them to be. And you maybe say, well, why does it matter what order they're in? Basically, unless you set with properties or triggers where the focus goes when you first open a form, it's going to go down. So it'll start like in, if you can see those 2 nodes there on the data blocks, we have the instructor node first, and then we have a section underneath it. So if this is how it was in the form, the focus would be on the instructor block first. And what that means is when you see the blinking cursor, when you first open the form, it would be for the first item in the instructor block. And that's where your cursor would be blinking. And that's important because you'll see with a master detail relationship, you have 2 pieces of the form, one going to each database table, and you can actually query one without querying the relationship to the other. So you could actually even use this just to get a list of sections. And you probably wouldn't want to do that, but you'll see when you work through the labs and through some of the demos that there are ways to do that. And there are also ways for you to prevent the user from being able to do that or allow them to, or you can see that there are a lot of options here, and you have to really think about your users and how they're going to understand this. They probably don't know what a database is. They don't know what the relationship is from this table to this table. And you know, they don't have to know, and they shouldn't know. We are almost like service providers. We're creating something to make the activities of our users, you know, easier. So we want to think how they think and then model the form in a way that's easier for them. So you can see on the right-hand side, I have a sample form, which is based on this master detail relationship. And in the master detail forms, generally, the way I would do it is you have one item, one block on the top, which only shows one record, one instructor record. You can see we have a frame around that. And then on the bottom, we have the section record and the section records. You can see there are also some items there that are not coming from the section table itself, and we're actually going to be doing that with post query and when validate item triggers. And this is a way of populating some these items actually become non-database items because we're going to be populating them through a trigger. We'll learn that in the trigger chapter. And the reason I've chosen to do that in this form is because I don't want my users to be able to update, say, the description for the course. And then you can see we put a scroll bar over there on the right. And basically, you know, the main thing that I think of when I design a form like this is you want to be the person who is going to, how can I say this? Like, you don't want to be giving carpal tunnel to your users. So what you should do is create the layout in a way that they do not have to navigate, you know, as much as possible, that everything they can see is there, that they don't have to resize things and move around and scroll. So those are all the considerations that you take in. You want to make it so that they don't have to click and you know, point around with their mouse as much as possible. So it'll be easier for them. They won't get carpal tunnel, and they'll be happy with you. And you know what? If the form is very confusing for them, you'll definitely hear a lot of feedback. So this is the layout style. For the master, we pretty much, to get that look that we got there, we use the form layout. Remember when we went through the wizard, you had a choice between form and layer and tabular. So the form is the one that gets them to line up, you know, one after another. And then we choose a single record. And then on the detail, we choose a tabular layout, which means we get multiple there. And you think about, you know, what your database is, how much information is there, how are you deploying this form, is it going to, what kind of desktop, how big is it, how many, you know, records is possible there. If this is a web-based form, then you're going to want to, you know, jump into, we won't cover this in this lecture series as much because it's a little more complex. If you're going to have it on the web, then you have to have an application server set up. Now, if you do have that set up, there is a button in Forms which will launch it on the web, so you can immediately see how the form will look on the web, and then you can decide, you know, if I have multiple records and a scroll bar, what's the best count to put in there, so that, you know, basically what you want is think about your user, you know, having the smallest possible screen, maybe a 15-inch screen, and you don't want them to have to scroll down, you know, if that's the case there. So basically, you run through the wizard just as you did in Chapter 2 to create a single data block. So first, you're going to run through it and do the master block and just follow the wizard just as we did. Now, the second step is you're going to create the detail block. Now, in the detail block, you're going to run through the wizard, and at a certain point, it'll automatically add an additional step to handle the master detail relationship. Basically, it's going to be asking you, you know, if you want a relationship, if you want to create a relationship. Now, if the data dictionary, as I said previously, has the information, then it will be able to determine, oh, you're in the section table, let's say, and it can see that the database in the data dictionary has been queried, and it shows that there is a foreign key relationship between the student and enrollments. So if you made your master on the student and now you're on the enrollments, likewise, if we did instructors and sections, we've got the tool is going to find that foreign key is there, and it'll give you the option of using that as your relationship between the two tables. Now, you will find that there are plenty of databases out there where the foreign keys have not been defined that way, or a table has been added, but the foreign key wasn't put in for whatever reasons. So there's also, in that step, you can deselect this auto feature to auto create the relationship, and you can, you'll actually have a pull down where you can kind of take the item from the master and the detail that you want to create the relationship from. Now, when we go through the demo, what we're going to see is that when you create the master detail relationship, you're going to create a series of triggers. Most of the time, I would say 95% of this time, I just let the tool create the triggers, populate the trigger with the default PL SQL to maintain the relationship, and I leave it at that. If you have a more complicated scenario, or you want to give the user a more descriptive error message or something like that, if they've done something, you know, that's not allowed, or they're not getting the information they want, you want to explain to them why that is, then you could make use of those triggers and add to them. But at this point, it's good just to be aware of what those triggers are, what they do, and leave them alone. So two that we see are the unclear detail trigger and the unpopulate detail trigger. Both of these work to ensure that records in the detail block correspond to the record in the master block. So what you'll see in the demo when we run that form is, let's say we take the student and enrollment. As I scroll through the different students in the master section, the details are going to correspond to that, and they're going to go through. And as I go to the next student, the bottom will also change, and you'll see the next group of enrollments, for the next student. And that's important because you may also decide, actually, depending on your database, that you don't want that to happen initially because you've got a big database and there's going to be a lot of information there, and maybe you have some kind of a complex condition that you're only seeing certain records and it takes time to populate that. Then you can also have that delayed, and what that would be is that that's set by some properties. You're going to go through the labs and you'll learn which those properties are. So when you're in the when you see a particular student, you could have the bottom part for the enrollments be blank, and then if you move your cursor there, then you do get them, and likewise. So those are some of the options in the property, and then these two triggers are the triggers which maintain that relationship. So if you want to do something to change that relationship, you could make use of these triggers. You may want to kind of warn the user that there are no enrollments for the student. Would you like to create some enrollments? Something like that. Then you'll make the use of alerts, and we'll learn that later on too. So here's another trigger, the onCheck_delete master. Now this calls the clear all master detail procedure, which is a procedure to clear the detail block when querying from one master record to the next. So basically what this enables your form to do is when it moves from one student record to the next student record, you want to clear out the form for all the different enrollments that are in there. And this is the one that'll do that. And what's really nice for you is that these wizards exist and they write all the code. So you don't have to worry about all the PL SQL there. Now, here are some more triggers that are created when you go through the wizard. One of them is the onPopulate detail and the query master detail. Now, these are also two that work together. The first one checks to ensure that the current master record exists, and then if it does, it calls the second trigger to populate the detail. So basically, these are all the triggers that allow you to just kind of proceed in the form. You remember when we learned about working through the runtime form, and after you've entered your query and you're back in normal mode, but you have fetched a series of data, and you remember there's like a blue triangular button that you press to move from one record to the next. And as you do that, these are all the triggers which fire at those instances to get rid of the data which was in the detailed block, to get it ready for the next set of records, to populate it, to check it, etc. We have even more triggers. We have another one. These are all master detail triggers, and this may seem confusing. I know you've got quite a lot of different triggers in here now. And for the most part, I would say leave them alone. But it's important for you to realize what the wizard is doing for you, and it's quite helpful because it's maintaining all these different elements that control how the form runs, and it's writing all the code for you. It's quite nice. So this is one more trigger, the onCheck_delete master trigger. Now this fires whenever a user tries to delete a record in the master block. And what it does is, if detail records exist, then the deletion of the master record is prevented. Okay, so what is that talking about? Okay, what we're doing here is, if you have a student and he has a bunch of enrollments, right? The student is attending all these different courses. And so we have the student table, the enrollment table, which maintains all that information. And remember that all the information that's in the enrollment table is dependent on a student existing, because it has to take an ID from the student table, which exists in order to give it enrollments. So the way the form works, you could delete one piece and not the other piece. So, well, that's a default scenario. Of course, you can control these things with the different properties and different triggers. So if you're going to delete a student from the database and he has enrollments, you can't do that. The database actually won't allow you to do that. Instead of getting, now see, remember, we have a lot going on here. This is like, despite whether you're doing this on the web or you're just going across the network with the more standard client server, a lot of this logic, the logic which you see in the triggers, is logic which is occurring on the client side, which means it's occurring on the PC of the person running the form. And so the error message is coming from the form level. Now, you could get, if you didn't use some of these triggers and you tried to make this deletion and the database has constraints which forbid you from doing that, you'll also get an error message back from the database. Usually users are not going to be familiar with these. These are those like Aura 075W blah, 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 and it gives you all this information. And generally, that's something a database programmer may be used to because it'll say like violated constraint and the constraint name. But remember, your users are not database programmers. They're just an ordinary person who works in your office, and you are you're providing a service for them, and you want to make this as easy for them to understand. So you're going to want to make use of creating some kind of an error for them, and which makes more sense. And what you'll see when you go into the onCheck delete master is it will tell you, it will give you a more meaningful message, and you can even enhance that message and give something even more specific if you want for your users. If you feel that you do some testing with your users and you see that they really don't have some of the basic understanding of how the database works, and that's fine because they're not database programmers. So you want to make this more understandable for them, then you could create more detailed error messages which explain what's going on in a language which they can understand. So that's pretty much a wrap up of the basic concepts of a master detail form. Now what I'm going to do in the demonstration is I'm just going to walk through creating a master detail form, and I'm going to examine all the different triggers, and I'll show you some of the different properties which you can adjust. And this goes further. You're going to continue with when you work through the labs and read the text, you'll see that there are even more properties that you have to learn about and more ways that you can control this relationship. And to complete your understanding, to make sure that you've got it down, go do the test you're thinking and go to the website and go through all those practice questions, and you'll have it down. You'll be ready for Chapter 5. Okay? See you then.